Good morning. Welcome to worship at Carmel Valley Community Chapel on this nice, warm June Sunday, just about a week or so away from the summer solstice. I want to thank Bill Salmon for being our liturgist this morning. Bill, we will remind you to go to the podium for the call to worship. I will. Awesome. And I invite you to stay afterwards for some chatting in Fellowship Hall with our Zoom folks who will be joining us around 11:30. At this point in the service, I invite all who are able to please stand and to join responsively in the call to worship printed in the bulletin.
Look to this day.
For it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of our existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty.
For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision.
But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. And I invite you to join in singing our opening hymn, which is number 89 in the hymnal, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. Seated. At this point in our service, I invite you into a few moments of silent prayer and meditation. But before we begin our meditation, I just wanted to say a little bit about the music for this morning. Our prelude was by Beethoven. Our first hymn was by Beethoven. Our anthem, our offertory, and our postlude are by Beethoven. So for some unknown reason, I decided to do a Beethoven Sunday as far as our musical theme. But there is something with this theme that connects with what I'm going to say in my message this morning. The prelude and the postlude are earlier works of Beethoven's. The anthem and the offertory, the two pieces that are in the middle of the service, are later works of Beethoven. These later works were written at a time when he was writing the ninth and his final symphony, a symphony from which we get the tune that hymn was, that we just sang. And it comes at a time in his life when he is completely deaf and cannot hear anything. But the reason why I wanted to play these pieces together in one service is just to contrast early works with later works. And towards the end of his life, Beethoven wrote some of his most famous, most well-loved, most monumental works, like the Ninth Symphony. He also wrote these short little pieces for piano, bagatelles from Opus 126. And there is something interesting about so many composers who, towards the end of their life, turn their attention to short, succinct little pieces of music. And some of these pieces are just gorgeous and rarely heard. Now, I can't tell you that there was a huge change in Beethoven's writing. Early or late, Beethoven is Beethoven. But I do think that these short pieces show what a master composer can do. So someone who has learned the craft in creating a musical experience and making a musical statement that is so succinct. So I'll leave my comments to that. And at this point, I invite us all into a few moments of silent prayer and meditation together. I invite you to take this time to center your hearts, your minds, your bodies, your spirits into this time and this place that we are sharing. At the conclusion of our meditation, you'll hear the anthem begin. Let us join together now in silent prayer and meditation. Our scripture reading for this morning comes from the book of Proverbs, a book that we don't often have or hear read in our morning services. Proverbs is a collection of sayings from some very diverse sources. It was given its current shape after the exile, probably sometime in the late 6th to early 5th centuries BCE. In this book, wisdom is personified as a woman who speaks from the busiest centers of human society and calls out to people to follow her instruction and to live well and wisely. The portion we hear today begins with woman wisdom calling out to humanity, and then segues to a mythic poem describing how she was with God at the beginning of creation. You need to be aware that many of the Hebrew words in this poem are very difficult to translate. And there are several different possible translations of many of the Hebrew verbs. The language itself is cryptic and ambiguous, and it just may be that the poet chose such words when there were others available that would have been more precise, perhaps because the details of wisdom's origin are mysterious and ultimately inexpressible. Let's take a listen to our reading for today.
Good morning, everyone. Look, wisdom calls out, and discernment lifts her voice. On the heights, beside the way, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. By the gates at the city's entrance, at the approach to the portals, she shouts, "To you, people, I call out, and my cry is to all who live. God created me at the beginning of the way, the very first of the works of old. Ages ago I was shaped, at the start of the first things of earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no well springs abounding with water, before the mountain were anchored, before hills I was brought forth. God had not made earth and open land and the world's first bit of soil. When the heavens were founded, I was there. When God traced a circle on the face of the deep, propped up the skies above, establishing the springs of the deep, set to the sea its limit, that the waters not transgress God's command, and strengthen the earth's foundations. And I was with God like a master worker, and I was daily God's delight, rejoicing in the divine presence always, rejoicing in the inhabited world, and delighting in the human race."
So, how would you define wisdom? When I Googled the word wisdom, I got the following. 1, the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. The quality of being wise. You know, it always kind of bothers me when a definition uses the word itself to define itself. Anyway, I guess they couldn't resist. Second definition, the soundness of an action or decision with regard to the application of experience, knowledge, and good judgment. And they gave an example in a sentence, quote, some questioned the wisdom of building the dam so close to an active volcano. Which begs the question, why some? Third definition, the body of knowledge and principles that develop within a specific society or period. The example they used there was, quote, the traditional farming wisdom of India. Merriam-Webster lists several synonyms of wisdom: discernment, insight, perception, perceptiveness, sagacity, sapience. That last one should ring a bell. That's one half of what we call ourselves, Homo sapiens. It seems that we, in our humility, designated ourselves Homo sapiens to declare our wisdom. How could we have been so foolish? That's probably a good reminder why creatures who, in the grand time frame of evolution, creatures who have only recently discovered how to talk, should probably not name themselves. Yet Proverbs presents wisdom as the first of God's creation, who was a master worker alongside God, helping in the creation of the cosmos. In her essay on the book of Proverbs, Christine Roy Yoder puts this into perspective when she writes, quote, Proverbs invites us into an ancient and ongoing conversation about what is good and wise and true in life. Page after page, Proverbs inspires and requires of us fresh reflection about our lives, our communities, and our world. In the book of Proverbs, the concept of wisdom, the way in which the book itself defines and fleshes out what wisdom is about. It's about righteousness, social justice, and equity. And I could not help but notice that none of those words got in the dictionary definition that I Googled. Proverbs presents wisdom as being focused on the ethical relationships between individuals and communities. Yoder goes on to say, quote, wisdom's authority springs from her existence prior to God's creation of the cosmos. And earlier in chapter 3, wisdom is the means by which God created the world. She is woven into God's handiwork. To love her and to accept her invitation to wisdom's table is to awaken to the interconnectedness of God's creation, to align with and participate in God's ongoing work in the world, and as a result, to flourish, unquote. And much of that reminded me of the work of a contemporary process theologian and professor that I deeply admire and have been inspired by, named Catherine Keller. In her book, Cloud of the Impossible, she has a chapter titled Spooky Entanglements, in which she explores the world of quantum mechanics from her own theopoetic perspective. I have read this chapter many times over the last several years, and I'm still learning what it's trying to tell me. So I need to begin with a disclaimer here about what I'm going to do next, which is a very brief summary of some of the discoveries quantum mechanics, modern physics, now accepts as basically true. These are all found in her book called Spooky Entanglements. I believe that title comes from a quote by Einstein, who could not believe that some of these principles were actually true of reality. They just seemed too spooky, too much like, I think he called it telepathy at one point. But physicists now have empirical evidence that, first, observer and observed are interconnected. Each affects the other. And the act of observing a particle will change and determine how it acts. And the particle itself, that which is being observed, also has an impact on the observer. The idea that an observer is separate from what is being observed is a fantasy. 2. And all these observations and this talk about particles have to deal with quantum particles, which are subatomic particles that are very, very small. Number 2, once a particle interacts with another particle, even though they may no longer be physically near one another, whatever happens to one happens to them both instantaneously. It seems that once particles interact, they are forever entangled. And even though spatially separate, they do not operate autonomously. Now, there's a Nicaraguan priest, poet, and liberation theologian who passed away just a few years ago, named Ernesto Cardenal. And I want to read a short poem of his. And he begins with a quotation from the physicist David Bohm. Cardenal writes, "Everything interpenetrates everything," says Bohm. "Sighs are air and go into the air, but the oxygen molecule in your sigh, did it cease to live as it left you? Living and non-living matter are the same thing. Just as there's also no emptiness. There is no empty space. And the entire universe is energy, which sometimes takes the form of matter." Everything is interconnected. The physicist David Bohm rejected the notion of unconnected individual particles. In his view, nothing was disconnected from the whole. And he posited that everything that is shares a common quality of unbroken wholeness. everything that is shares a common quality, and that quality is one of unbroken wholeness. Could the cosmos have been formed with this unbroken wholeness as an intrinsic quality forever shared by everything? Let me remind you what Yoder said about wisdom. Wisdom is the means by which God created the world. She is woven into God's handiwork. To accept the invitation to wisdom's table is to awaken to the interconnectedness of God's creation, to align with and participate in God's ongoing work in the world, and as a result, to flourish. This is just, no better way to explain it. But I love it. I love this mysterious entanglement that connects us all, whether we're aware of it or not. And I am aware that most of the time, our experience of who we are is as an individual. And it's different from other people's experiences of who they are as an individual. And yet, physicists are saying that that is not how reality really is. So I'm going to close with a story by a doctor, Rachel Naomi Raymond, and she writes about the time when she attended the birth of a couple's child. I do not share this story as proof or even of an example of what the physicists are talking about, simply because I still do not understand fully what the physicists are talking about. But I can't help but see this idea of connectedness and entanglement and an inherent, unbroken wholeness in this story. Raymond writes, the baby's father, a first-generation Mexican-American, was a graduate student at the university where I worked. He had married another student, a young woman from Boston, whose family had been here for several generations. This was their first baby, and they wanted the very best of care. The university clinics were prepared to offer that. The young couple had gone through childbirth training together and had attended parenting classes as well, and they felt ready. And so were we, with the full power of contemporary obstetrical and pediatric medicine to support us. But things had not gone well. The labor was long and very difficult. After many hours, the obstetricians offered the couple a surgical intervention. But the young woman had been fearful of a C-section, and so they refused. Several more hours went by, during which the obstetricians called me in as a pediatric consultant, and it was decided to offer the couple surgery again. But despite her exhaustion, her pain, and the pleading of her husband, the young mother was adamant she would not have the surgery. She was too frightened. Another hour passed without much progress, and in desperation, the young man called his mother-in-law on the East Coast and asked her to speak to Jennifer, his wife, about having the surgery. And while they spoke on the phone, he went with me into the waiting room to tell his own father what was happening. Although he had come to California from Mexico long ago, Michael's father spoke little English. He was a man close to the land, weathered and strong. At first a migrant farm worker, and then, with the help of his sons, the owner of a small farm in the Santa Clara Valley. Michael was the eldest. He had been sitting in this room for many hours, awaiting the birth of his first grandchild. He listened carefully as Michael told him what was happening, his face growing serious and thoughtful. Then he nodded and said a few words in Spanish to his son and put his arm around his shoulder. Raymond says, I could see Michael relax a little. Afterward, we went back to the labor room to find that after speaking with her mother, Jennifer had at last decided to go ahead with the surgery. Jennifer, her eyes filled with tears, lay back in her bed, exhausted. Most of the obstetrical team went to prepare the operating room for the C-section, and I went up 2 floors to my office to let them know that I would be attending the surgery to care for the baby. I had barely reached my desk when I received a stat page from Jennifer's obstetrician. Before she could be taken to the operating room, Jennifer had rallied and with 3 great pushes had delivered her baby. Everyone is fine, said the obstetrician. And over the phone, I could hear the baby crying. It was a boy. Afterward, I asked Michael what he thought had happened. He replied that the obstetrician had offered him several explanations, but he actually thought it had to do with his father. Seeing my look of surprise, he smiled and said, my father is a great man. When he had gone to tell his father that the baby had been born without surgery, the older man had smiled and nodded. There has been much fear, his father told him in Spanish. He had heard about his daughter-in-law's fear, and he had also felt the fear in his son, Michael. So he had known that the baby, too, was afraid. And so, sitting alone in the waiting room, he had spoken with his grandchild in his mind, encouraging him to come and to be born. He had shown the baby his many memories of the beauty of the land, its dawns and sunsets, the new crops, and the rich harvests. He had told the baby that he looked forward to walking together on the earth. He had spoken of the goodness of life, of friendship and laughter and good work. And lastly, he had spoken of his love for the family. He had remembered his own father in Mexico and his wife, both now dead. And one by one, he had spoken of the baby's uncles, his sons, of their goodness and strength, of his pride in them and in the people they had married. He shared memories of Christmases and birthdays and weddings, of the joy they took in each other's lives. He had offered the baby his heart. And the baby had come. Raymond concludes, over the years, I have attended many births as a pediatrician or a birth coach, a family member or a friend. I sometimes suggest to parents in labor that they reach out to their unborn child in just this same way, showing their baby mental images of the world's goodness, sharing their love of life to strengthen and encourage the baby in its difficult passage. End quote. Talk about an interconnectedness and the way in which we are all entangled with one another, even with those who are no longer living, and with a new birth that has not yet come but is coming into the world. And how there just might be in this story a witness to an unbroken wholeness that is who we truly are, all of us together, undivided, regardless of how our experience might tell us otherwise. Perhaps the world was really formed in wisdom after all.
Please give as you are able with joy and wisdom.
At this point in the service, I invite anyone who wishes to share a joy, a concern with the community. I want to begin by expressing a joy and congratulations to Jennifer Garbarino and Tom Bishop, who got married yesterday. And it was a wonderful, loving, joyous, heart-opening event at Hidden Valley yesterday. So for their new life together as a married couple, thanks be to God. I also want to give a congratulations to our graduates. We have two who recently graduated from high school, Trinity Terra Nova and Eliza Fletcher. And also today, my nephew, Iban Iramatagi, is graduating from high school. So congratulations and blessings to all of our recent graduates. Blessed be. Is there anything that folks wish to share this morning? Diane.
A little blessing. There's a deer right here that just looked in. A deer just looked in our door, a beautiful doe. So thank you, Mother Nature and God.
Yeah. Oh, there. He or she is taking a drink from the fountain right now. What a wonderful image of our unbroken wholeness. Doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, that fits any time. That's beautiful. Is there anything else folks wish to share this morning? Well, then I invite us to join together in a few moments of silent prayer. After a little bit of time has gone by, I'll invite us all to join together in saying this new version of the prayer of Jesus that's printed in our bulletin. Gracious God, for the glories and the wonders and the mystery of creation, I give you thanks. For all creatures, great and small, for the beauty of this world, for the ways in which all of our lives are woven together in an unbroken wholeness. I give you thanks. As wondrous, as mysterious, as crazy as it all is, may we be led on paths of justice and peace, love and compassion that open our hearts to one another and to this world that is in need of people who can create a world of justice and peace, of love and compassion and equity for all. May our openness to this great mystery be more than just a vision, but inspiration, inspirited action that we take today and every day. Hear us now as we say this new translation of that ancient prayer that our brother Jesus taught us to pray, saying, Eternal Spirit, earth maker, pain bearer, life giver, source of all that is and that shall be, Father and Mother of us all, loving God in whom is heaven. The hallowing of your name shall echo through the universe. The way of your justice be followed by the peoples of the earth. Your heavenly will be done by all created beings. Your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. With the bread we need for today, feed us. In the hurts we absorb from one another, forgive us. In times of temptation and test, strengthen us. From the grip of all that is evil, free us. For you reign in the glory of the power that is love, now and forever. Amen. I have just a few announcements to make this morning. We will be having our meditation service on Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. on Zoom. The link will be going out on Tuesday. There is also a Friends of Rippling River meeting in Fellowship Hall this Wednesday at 1:30. And a week from today, I will be away at the regional conference of the Northern California, Nevada Conference of the United Church of Christ. Yeah. NCUCC. And I'm very grateful to Lamont Wilsey for taking the service, and it will be on Zoom. So 1 week from today, there is no service here physically in the chapel. It will be on Zoom, and the link will be going out Thursday or Friday.
And the title of the sermon will be Fica Conmigo.
Say that again, Lamont.
Fica Conmigo.
The title is Fica Comigo.
Fica Conmigo.
Fica Comigo.
I'll
And,
give you a hint. It's Portuguese.
and it will all be translated 1 week from today. Yes. So I hope you will all join us for that. And then the following week, we're back here. And that following week, the last Sunday in June, we are going to be receiving new members. And I'm very delighted that we have 5 new members that will be joining the chapel. So that'll be a very festive Sunday. I hope you'll join us for that. And I would really appreciate if someone might volunteer to do refreshments for that Sunday. Refreshments. So that we can have a proper reception for our new members on Sunday. So talk to me, or if someone out there in the virtual world would email me, and we can get that taken care of. Are there any announcements that folks have to make this morning? Well, then let's join in singing our closing hymn, which is number 707 in the hymnals, the Hymn of Promise. In the bulb there is a flower, in the seed an apple. Now may you go forth this day in peace, rejoicing in the Spirit that travels with you, rejoicing in all the entanglements with other creatures that are always within you, rejoicing in the unbroken wholeness that lives as reality and as promise. Go forth this day in peace and in a deep rejoicing. Amen.